So the best way to avoid doing that is by getting your roddings done properly. So that's what ties the layers together is your rodding, and that'll really help you end up with a nice straight, somewhat straight result at the end of your lift. Okay. So another thing to mention, unless you're the very first person testing, the equipment's already going to be damp. Make sure you go through the steps. You have your own checklist. They look at it as you giving, or they won't be giving you credit for someone else's work. That's how they look at it. So just make sure that you go through all the steps. It's exactly the same performance checklist you have in your book is exactly what your test packet will have, except that it'll have a pass, fail, and a retry column after the steps. All right, so we're going to dampen the inside of our cone. We're going to dampen our base plate. All right, so you want it to be damp, but you don't want it to have any standing water. So just make sure there's no cooling on there. All right, you're going to set it up in the middle. Swing our tabs over, and those are going to hold it down. All right, so your rod. Good standard, good practice is to keep your rod in your material. So after it's dampened, you just keep returning it to your sample. Most of the time you'll be sampling in a dirt lot somewhere, and you don't want to be laying it in the dirt. That's just going to let it dry out, contaminate your sample. So you just returning it back to your sample is the best way to keep it moist and in a usable condition. All right, so use a bigger scoop. Again, so this test is timed. A couple of ways you can shave some time off is by keeping it close to your material and using big full scoops. You don't have to worry too much about making a mess on the outside, because at the end of your filling, you'll have a quick chance to just wipe it off. It's really the best way to do it. Instead of someone gingerly trying to put it in there, it just eats up all your time. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start. So you're gonna fill this up in 3 equal layers by volume, so not necessarily by height. Because it's a cone, the first one's gonna be about 2 5/8, about round it to 3 inches. It's about 1/4 of the way. Your second layer is gonna be about 6 inches, halfway. So it's, I believe it's, they call it 6 1/8, I think is where it goes. So we'll just round it to 6, about halfway. And then on your last scoop, you want it to be heaping over the top. As you're rodding, if it ever drops below the top of the cone, you're gonna stop your count, add some more material, and then continue where you left off. Okay? I'll go ahead and demonstrate. You don't want to have a lot of excessive vibration, so try not to be banging it with your scoop or your rod. You want to incline the rod so it follows the shape of the cone. It's 25 roddings. And there's no tapping on this one, so keep that in mind. There shouldn't be a mallet or anything around. You're going to go right into adding more material. All right, so that's about halfway. And hold it to the outside. Basically, your first one was here. You're going to make sure you're penetrating the previous layer by about 1 inch. So if you hold it on the outside and then grab it there, now you've got a built-in depth gauge, right? Material and your final layer. And what I usually do is I'll get it full and then I'll add a little bit so it's ready if it drops down. Again, we're going to measure to that previous one. We're penetrating about 1 inch. We're going to say it's dropped down a little bit, so we're going to add a little more material and stop at 6. 18. 25, and then you're going to immediately roll and screed it off. All right, so now if you have material inside, you just quickly wipe it off. Don't have to be real pretty about it. You want to make sure that everything is clear from the bottom here so that it can actually flow once you pull the cone up. All right, so once you got the material cleared off the bottom, you're going to push down on the opposite side of the clamp that you're going to release. It's the same thing on this side. Okay, and at this point we're going to lift it straight up. You have 5 seconds plus or minus 2. Now keep in mind, 5 seconds plus or minus 2 is not the same as 3 to 7. Okay, so we look at the 5 seconds as being a target. The 2 plus or minus is more like the outer rings. It's still acceptable, but it's not as good. All right, so that's a good way to kind of look at it. It's a straight motion, no twisting or tilting, turning, just straight up. Okay, a little bit dry. So now you're going to measure to your displaced center. All right, so if the circle had moved over here, we're measuring to the center of the circle, wherever that line lands. The way we measure it is we invert the cone. We run our rod across the top, and then we measure to our displaced center. This one we're reading to the nearest 1/4 inch. There we go. All right, so this will be, we'll call that 6 1/4. You're reading to the bottom of the bar there, so we call that 6 1/4.